My name's Andrew, and I'm super excited to be here at PlatformCon 2024 talking about deployment lessons in hypergrowth. Quick agenda for the next 15 minutes as we cover intent-based deployments are why I'm here, what hypergrowth was like, and the lessons that we can extract and the principles we can extract from it, as well as what is an intent-based deployment and why is this so important as we enter the next era of cloud. Currently, I'm CEO of Pradvana. Pradvana is a platform company working on making sure that every platform engineer can be a force multiplier. I've held leadership positions across various organizations like Vise, an early stage startup in fintech, Dropbox infrastructure, and have seen three eras of the internet. And the only constant across working at all these wonderful places has really been this one word: interns. And now everyone's thinking, why is Andrew talking about interns? Interns are very important. They are the reason why I'm here talking to you. In 2016, I did a walkabout around engineering at Dropbox to look for the next big problem I wanted to solve. And after talking to a bunch of eng directors and VPs, I heard one common theme. We had interns crying, and we had had staff engineers quit after just a few weeks on the job. And what I learned is that our software development lifecycle was just not working for the cloud era. And that's why I'm here today, because I really want to make sure that no one has that experience that this intern group had. No one wants to ever think, am I going to get a return offer that's going to make or break my career? So now, jumping from interns to hyperscale, what's it like to work in a hyperscale environment? What's it like to work in an organization that goes from, sub 10, 15, 20 million users to humanity scale in just a few years? And I spent the better part of 2008 through 2020 working at Dropbox and YouTube. Both of these are humanity scale organizations. Both of them were very early cloud companies. And we can use the lessons we learned there as leading indicators of change, leading indicators of what's probably going to happen to the rest of us as we adopt cloud in a truly next generation way. And there's going to be four main lessons. And the first two, for the sake of this quick 15-minute presentation, we're going to take as just truisms. There's going to be a lot of great presentations that talk about these two things. And I think I really encourage you to listen to the other PlatformCon talks as it pertains to infrastructure as code being good, and as well as abstracting infrastructure away. I think both of these two terms, two concepts are going to be covered probably in a lot of detail over the next couple days in a lot of the other presentations. I'm going to focus on how you operate in the cloud once you've abstracted this and gotten yourself there. And then what is truly different about running cloud operations than sort of the legacy operations that we've traditionally had in data centers and early cloud V1 sort of tool chains. So with that, let's jump into cloud operations. So operating in the cloud, what does this mean? Well, let's look at YouTube. It's a good case study. We had a fairly simple infrastructure, and all things considered, we had batch systems, databases, caching. All of this lived in the YouTube infrastructure. And this scaled us to like tens, hundreds of millions of users, scaled to, a large amount of data being uploaded every minute. But post acquisition, of course, Google says, we're really good at things. We're really good at serving thumbnails. We're really good at, this one thing, search. And so we add Google to the mix. So now, we've, without bearing the lead, we've got multi-cloud now. And Google's really good at these storage systems and comment and search, RPC proxies. We have all this infrastructure in two different places now, some in YouTube and some in Google. A challenge with this, as is with all multi-cloud setups that we see today, is that we have these two different tool chains. So we had this YouTube tool chain of very similar to what we've learned today. And this is why I say that we had learned a bunch of these lessons. We had this infrastructure as code stack and synced YT ops. We had sort of way of distributing our software similar to Argo. Okay, it's a little bit more simplistic, but very similar to like let's sync everything out there in a very deterministic way. And we had a way of running it on Armonit. But then we introduced the Google stack. We had a ton more. We had a lot more systems and a lot more things to build upon. This really confused people and slowed down the engineering teams of 100, 200 people. They really were struggling with this. Unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I moved over to Dropbox at that point, and we saw a very similar story. So we had a second attempt at this. Similar tool chain, And what we ended up doing is we had initially databases and web in Dropbox and storage and block front ends in Amazon. Well, what happened is we ended up migrating just under an exabyte of storage out of AWS S3 into our own infrastructure. We did this in about 18 months. We built an entire storage stack end to end and did this migration. So now we had effectively, again, two clouds to manage, the Dropbox data center cloud, as well as the Amazon cloud, which was like global. So we said, okay, well, at YouTube, Google, we did this with two interfaces. What if we brought this down to a single interface? Maybe that'll solve the problem. So what we did is we built an abstraction layer, very early IDP, if you will, that had all of our machine and service information all in one place. This is everything was keyed for deployments off of this. Everything was about lifecycle in this one spot. We said, let's try this. This will be a good solution to this. This will be how we avoid this. We'll teach people one tool chain to manage two clouds. It was all well and good until we had the reinstall steps. And this just confused the service owners who really only wanted to deal with deployment of the web service. They did not care at all about the platform requirements they had to meet to have reinstallation. We got this wrong. Single interface, actually, again, the incorrect thing to do. So we said, let's go back to first principles. Let's try to solve this in a different way. And it's around the same time, the same era, Netflix was doing something very similar. And this is how I believe they ended up with managed delivery. And so let's walk through what a system in managed delivery or an intent-based delivery would look like for this. So a way different paradigm would be, let's just assume that the engineer wants to ship code. I just want to ship code. So they have a very simple configuration, very standard like this. I'm sure a lot of you have something like this for for Kubernetes deployments. And then you have your release team, your DevOps, your SRE teams. They show up and they say, "Well, we need SLAs. It's no longer it's a production service now. We have multiple environments. We need this type of thing." So then the code becomes a little bit more complicated. So now we've got alert checks, we've got rollback parameters, we've got a lot of information that's like being defined in these configurations. And then we've got someone from compliance and legal that shows up, says, "Hey, we need a new region. We have this GDPR thing. We have to actually deploy a different data center in Europe. We need storage in Europe. We need storage in the US." And suddenly this becomes even more complicated. But back to interns, right? Because this is what it's all about. If I apply this intern litmus test to this, and like, can they figure this out? The answer is like, no. And interns aren't going to be across this. They're there for 6 to 8 weeks. They're trying to get something done. So how can we think about this? We got to get to a state where everyone is doing what they do best. Infrastructure team is doing what they do best. Delivery team is doing what they do best. Service rules for service teams. So let's move to a declarative state. Let's declare our infrastructure and delivery rules up front and then map services to them. Let's separate the service definitions from the infrastructure definitions from the delivery definitions, and let's make all of this into a single desired state. And what we learned and what Netflix learned is that declarative scales. We did this with a project called Atlas at Dropbox. Netflix figured this out with managed delivery. We have links for these in the end. This scales. Getting to a system that separates these concerns is actually one of the most critical things platform teams can do because declarative interfaces scale for your organization. Okay, now let's talk about the next thing we learned, which was adapting to changes. I like to ask this question in a live audience. I'd say, how many of you have more than one system, more than two systems, more than five systems? Follow up question to that. How many of you have SaaS products that are integrated into your existing stacks? So you're depending on SaaS products. How many of you are dependent on analytics stacks that are now more real time enabled and providing feedback into the actual applications you're distributing? The end of the day, everything now is a distributed system. This means systems now cross boundaries. And ultimately, control is an illusion. We want to make everything feel pristine. We want to say that your production environments never change. That's not true anymore in a cloud native era. You have service dependencies, cloud dependencies, SaaS dependencies, and we can say that we want to have loosely coupled everything. We want to say we're going to do all of this failure analysis. All of these things are going to be true. But at the end of the day, the only thing that is true is change. It is the only constant in the cloud. And this is a deployment talk. So let's talk about the deployment attributes of the cloud today. Fundamentally, pipelines are bad with change. They are a unidirectional data structure that's very hard to deal. It's very hard to deal with change, very hard to resume, very complicated to manage. And from my perspective, at this point for cloud, They're rooted in the legacy of printing gold master CDs, and like this doesn't make any sense in cloud native software. Let's take a look at what this looks like. For those that, everyone's familiar with this type of pipeline. V1 staging, prod US, prod Asia, prod Australia. It's like you're going to start release, works well. Except when something goes wrong. Prod US fails. Now the question is, do you roll back everything? Do you want to just fix prod US? What if like it's only a US problem, but you need to get this to Asia and Australia? Do you build another pipeline? It gets very complicated and very confusing very fast. It's just painful and slow. An alternative model to this could be convergence, or is convergence. Let's take the same lessons we use in Kubernetes and apply that to our deployment system writ large. Let's take this example where we have US failing. We can easily just resume that pipeline in place because the convergence engine can interpret states, the declarative states we've used before, and figure out what to do to progress. Now let's make this even more complicated. Let's show the power of convergence and how it really shines. Let's first look at a legacy pipeline again, though. In this case, if we were to deploy V1 to V2 to V3, we have to wait for the pipelines to complete entirely. In a world where we have multiple regions and tenancy and lots of requirements that are just not the same requirements that you had in data center oriented technology stacks that you had when you printed gold master CDs and shipped them, it doesn't work anymore. Let's take a look at this now with a convergence based solution. Now we get a waterfall type of approach. We get an approach where we've cut down the delivery time by 50% in this case. You can fundamentally be game changing when you look at this from first principles and say, look, declarative infrastructure coupled with the convergence engine, we can now do things that we just couldn't even dream of that were possible on pipeline based systems. So at the end of the day, if we look at a modern intent based delivery system, number one, it's going to separate the responsibilities. Principle, separate responsibilities for your teams. Infrastructure, service rules, service definitions, delivery rules, separate them. Make it declarative. And it has to adapt to real-time change. Because guess what? As much as we want to believe that things are gonna that we have loosely coupled dependencies, it's not pragmatically for most of us, it's not gonna happen. It's just not going to. Um, and the last is that we need to abstract the infrastructure away, which we all know is a good principle. That's why we're in platform engineering. Okay, so who does this? What does this look like? Spinnaker is some reference architecture around this. It's very similar to this architecture here that we're proposing. What we see here is that we have inputs across the three different areas: infrastructure, business rules, and service configurations. We take those, we compile those down into desired states. Once we know the desired state, we can map that to a backend that needs to be deployed, whether it's Kubernetes, ECS, Terraform. It does not matter. You can plug these in arbitrarily now at this point because you're able to use the compiler to manage this. This type of infrastructure is exactly how we've built Pradvana's deployment system. Some people liken it to a platform orchestrator. I think that we're just introducing more confusing terminology every time we introduce a new orchestrator. I think deployments are just going to naturally evolve this way. We've seen this at the past at both Dropbox. We saw this at Netflix with managed delivery. These are the way that the world will evolve. If you want to look for additional resources, just try us out. Like, here's a couple things. The Dropbox Atlas migration talks a lot about how we moved from a sort of a traditional stack into a more managed delivery architecture. Netflix talks about managed delivery in their post. We've also blogged pretty extensively on the technical underpinnings and how to build a system like this. And we're going to be open sourcing lots of the parts of the Pradvana system over the next few months. You can also just give it a run, give it a try. Thank you.